Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Log Talk with Pert Near Outdoors. This is your host, Billy, and I am introducing this episode, which was hosted by Big Jim, and he had guest Brian Gottfried on. Brian is a local guy here from Lima, New York. Brian has been on before talking about wild turkey and things of that nature. So if you've been following along with us for a little while, you've heard Brian. You may personally know him. Great dude, and happy to have the connection that we do with him with Pert Near Outdoors, and also being from the same hometown and fellow graduates of HFL. So Jimbo and Brian got into a 2.5 hour conversation. So I'm deciding to break this up. It was definitely a fun chat. So I'm going to break it up into two parts. Part one, they talk a lot about Brian has had an awesome season, hence us getting him on. He shot a buck out of state and also shot 2 bucks here in New York. All three were great deer, and so we wanted to hear the stories from him. I do apologize. There was something funky with the audio. This was a Zoom call, so the audio, something was happening, especially in the first half. There was some feedback or something going on, like echoing. Not sure what was causing that, so I apologize in advance. It is still listenable, so I'm going to post it up, and there's some good entertaining content in there. So I'm going to leave it, but the second half, those two get into talking quite a bit about processing wild game, as far as grinding it up, the different cuts and how they do it, and just some more BS. So I'm going to break it up. The first one will be about an hour and a half, and the second one will be about an hour. So I'll post the second half later this week, and you all can kind of tag along and enjoy. And Big Jim, thanks again for holding down the ground. You do a great job. And I'm so lucky to have you as a brother, man. I'm still going to whoop your ass. I got a few weeks left, and I'm really sandbagging here, so I've got a few doe tags left in pocket. And watch out, little bro. I'm coming after you. So that's that. Those are threats, not jokes. I'm coming after you for real, Jim. Housekeeping. Going to keep it short and sweet. It is holiday season. I know that you're all out there shopping and creating those wish lists, so make sure that you're using those links in our bio, as it will help fund this puppy and keep it going, because you guys are all a bunch of freeloaders, and the shit ain't free. So thanks again for listening. Keep your eyes peeled for more big ones running around. And I just saw footsteps out in the garage, which means the wife's home. I got to go. See you later. Enjoy the podcast. Fade 'em. Hello. Yeah, that's your name.
Squirrels got me.
Big Jim.
Yeah.
Really, 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 really cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
That's good that you think of it, because that's what deer hunting typically is cold and fun.
Yesterday morning, I'm glassing up on the pass, and I see these deer moving, and I'm like, ooh, there's some deer moving. All of a sudden, I just see this person just head down, just hauling ass, wearing shorts and a t-shirt with a pack on. And I'm like, is that Tard? My dad always talks about floating through the woods like the autumn breeze.
So Robert's
when you're
the
275 pounds, I don't know how you do that, but
the Freightliner. It's just like a creeper. You're just kind of up in the corner watching what's going on down there.
yeah.
You know.
He's like,
he's up there slapping it, pissing all over everything.
is it warm yet?
How did you know the name of the actor?
That's right. I know.
Why did you say his name?
Hervé Villechaize.
You know what pert near means.
If you know what pert near means and you live in America, you're a redneck too.
Welcome to the Log Talk Podcast, brought to you by Pert Near Outdoors. All right. This week here, we're catching up with Brian Gottfried. We've got to be pretty good friends with you, and had you on back in turkey season. And it sounds like your luck has continued. So we wanted to catch up with you and get a little overview of your season and how it all played out.
Yeah, it's been all right. My deer season last year was absolutely horrible. I shot a doe fawn, which I didn't know it was a fawn at the time, but I shot a doe fawn opening day of the season last year. Literally looked at my watch and said, "Oh, it's whatever, 4:44. It's the last minute of legal." And I looked up and saw a deer, antlerless deer. I'm like, yeah, I'm shooting that thing, and so I shot it, and that was the only deer I shot last year.
Jesus.
So this year I went out with the attitude that, in general, I've shot a bunch of 2.5-year-old bucks. I've tried to shoot 3.5 or bigger. I don't want to say that I'm out like solely looking for big bucks. If there's a great hunt and it's a 2.5, it's a nice 2.5. Like, I'm not that picky, but I want to shoot a big buck, and I know that that's only going to happen if I let those little ones go. So I don't look down on anybody that shoots the smaller deer, but personally, like, I don't need to start filling another Rubbermaid bin with 2.5-year-old racks. You know what I mean? There's only so much wall space. So, and I like to eat deer. So more importantly, I just want to shoot deer, and I can shoot a bunch of does. Usually, last year was horrible. This year I went out with the mindset that I'm not waiting for a buck. I'm just gonna shoot every deer. I'm gonna fill every tag that I can. I'm not gonna shoot a spike probably. Probably not gonna shoot a 1.5-year-old buck. I would, you go out hoping that you're gonna see a bunch of deer, and you don't have to shoot a 1.5-year-old buck. But the first day I hunted, I guess before I even get that far, for the first time ever, I didn't buy my license until October 1st.
Really?
And no good reason, just life has been busy, and went to buy it, and the lady was like, "Well, just so you know, you can't get doe permits right now." And I was at Dick's, and I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, of course I can get doe permits. And I thought she was telling me I just couldn't get them there.
Oh,
so, no problem. I'm gonna go somewhere else and get them. But I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that was even a thing. And I feel stupid even saying that, because I grew up like reading the reg book front to back, like from before I even hunted. Like, I just knew everything. So to have one like slip by me like that, I was feeling pretty stupid. I was kind of rude to the lady at the counter. My girlfriend Jess was giving me plenty of shit about that, but I just couldn't believe it. So either way, I ended up getting 2 doe tags for the unit that I hunt, after November started. I wasn't too concerned about it. Do I really need 4 doe tags? Not. Yes. I do, but I don't. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't crying about it. But anyways, so we went out on the 3rd, was the first day, and I had hung a stand with my dad and a friend for Jess to hunt, and I got her in that stand. She had never been there, so I went with her, got her in the stand. Of course, the stand was a little crooked and it wasn't great, so we had to make sure she was comfortable in it. And then I was just going to go hunt a climber. So I walked maybe 300-400 yards from her, go to get in a climber, and the tree that I picked is too small. And I've had this lone wolf climber now for a few years, but I haven't used it a ton.
Yeah.
Last year I used it more than the previous years, but I'm still, like, obviously I still need to get used to like what will actually fit on. Like, it actually takes a little bit bigger tree than this old climber I used to use like for years and years, that was like probably a junky $100 Dick's special that I bought, but I was so comfortable with it. It just had like, it was the metal pins that locked it, and it was a little clanky.
I think I had that one too.
Yeah,
like $89 from Dick's. It
had a removable shooting rail that I took off immediately and threw away, and I loved it. Like, it was such an awesome stand, but the tubular metal on the seat part was starting to like separate, so I threw that thing in a dump as soon as I could when I saw that. Anyways, I got on this tree. It's too small for my stand, so I'm like, dang it, I gotta move. So I go to this other tree. It's not exactly where I want to be, but it'll work. I get halfway up the tree, and my stand's not going to level out. Like, it's going to be tipping down. So I'm like, damn it. So I climb back down, fix it, get back up, get all settled. And like 5 minutes later, I look over, and this little 4-pointer's walking up over this rise at 40 yards, and he's comes right under my stand. I'm taking selfies with it and sending them to Jess and like, look at this, I've been in the stand for 5 minutes, and it's like 5 p.m. already. And then I'm like, what am I doing? It's so early. Like, there's probably another buck with him. And I put my phone away and look over just in time to see a rack like coming over the rise where that one came. And I'm like, all right, he's gonna come 5 yards behind the tree here. Stand up, grab my bow, and as he like leveled out 25 yards from me, I realized that like it's just a good 2.5-year-old deer. He's kind of wide. He's got good time length. I'm like, I'm shooting this thing no matter what. And when I stopped him behind a branch that had a bunch of green leaves, and I thought 5 yards. There's no way that like it was just a tiny little branch. I didn't think anything of it. Somehow something happened. I shot. The deer ran like 20 yards and stood there, and there was no holes in him. I thought I heard it hit him, but he was just standing there with no holes in him. But I did notice he was kind of picking up his back leg a little bit, kind of like when your dog hurts its foot and it like favors that foot. And I thought that was odd. I was able to get another arrow knocked, drew back, and I kind of bleated at him just to get him to, I was hoping he'd be curious enough to turn broadside, and he did. And I shot, and I watched my arrow hit a grapevine like halfway between us and just dive between his legs. So I was pretty distraught. I climbed down and I go over there and there's blood on the ground. So I hit that deer. I'm pretty confident that I hit him in the opposite side back leg, like lower leg, like by the hook. I tracked it. I tracked a spot of blood here, a spot of blood there, and tracks in the mud for like 160 yards, and I just lost it. And I thought, all right, I'm going to back out, reassess the situation. And I just didn't feel like I was pretty confident I must have just grazed his leg or something. I mean, it was a speck of blood here and there for 160 yards.
Did you have both arrows?
Yeah, I had both my arrows, and one arrow cleanly missed him. The first arrow, there was like a brush of blood on one of the fletchings. There was no fat on it, even if you like shoot through like the belly or like low on the deer, like you usually end up with a bunch of fat if it's a pass through, but it's just not good. And there was just nothing. It was just a little swipe of blood on it. So I felt pretty good that night, but the next morning I woke up, couldn't stop thinking about it. So I actually called Bobby Axe and said, hey, if I called you and said this, and this, what do you think? He's like, yeah, I think you're right. I think that deer isn't mortally wounded. He probably just grazed it. Another hunter later on in the season told me he saw that deer, didn't have any problems walking around, so I felt good about it. But that was the start to my season. So I was like, hey, this is pretty good. Like I'm probably going to see some more deer. And then I proceeded to not see a single deer the rest of the month of October. I can't remember how many sits that was. It was 5 or 6. And I'm telling you, not a single deer, like zero. Didn't spook any walking in, didn't spook any walking out.
Wow.
Zero. And I'm not like hunting the same spot. I'm moving all around trying to, find deer, and I'm not finding them. Jess didn't hunt a whole lot. She might have hunted 4 or 5 times. She didn't see any deer. She's getting a little frustrated. One of those nights, we went to sit in a spot, and we just couldn't find a good spot. We ended up sitting on top of a log pile, and we did see like a little 1.5-year-old buck that she couldn't get a shot at. And that was it, man. It was slow. But last year I had gone out to Indiana with some friends, and they wanted me to go out again this year. I wasn't so sure I was going because I've been laid off from the Turkey Federation since June, and my buddies stepped up and they're like, look, you don't have to pitch in for the house, you don't have to pitch in for the rental truck that one of the guys rented. They're like, just get your license and come out here, make dinner one night or something.
That's awesome.
So I ended up going out there, and because I was out there last year, it was intriguing. We're hunting a national forest, and it's just so big. There's so much land out there. And I spent the first few days last year hunting out of my friends' stands, like, here, sit here. I shot a deer here once. I shot a deer here once, or I saw a big one here. I wasn't seeing deer, so I took my climber and started looking on Onyx, and I found some clear cuts next to ag fields, and kind of just did my own scouting and went to my own spot. I started seeing deer. The last day I was out there last year, I actually gut shot. I had a buck head on at like 12 yards, and I was going to shoot it straight down between the shoulder blades while it was eating or something. And I thought I was good, but it's such a narrow, there's such a narrow margin of error there. And I just hit a little back, I shot it and lost it. And then I had to go home, and I went home sick to my stomach about it. And then like the next day or 2 days later, one of my buddies that stayed out there saw a ton of vultures flying around. He's like, he texted me, he goes, dude, I know where your deer is, and I'm gonna go find it. And he went and found it for me. And it was in a cool spot. It was on the edge of about a 70-acre clear cut. In between that clear cut and some bedding on private, there's just like a little funnel where they sneak out of that clear cut. And I knew I wanted to be near that. And so I started looking around on Onyx, and I had identified a ton of places. I branched out in like, I would guess like a 30-mile radius of the house that we rent. And I turned the aerials off. I just started looking at terrain features, and I marked a bunch of spots. I turned the aerials on. I started marking spots based on, edges and habitat types. And then like the week before we went out there, I realized it was going to be like in the high 60s, low 70s every day we were there. And I was like, oh man, I need to start correlating all these spots I want to look at with water. So I did that. So, and I'd marked my, like, I want to go look at this spot with like a yellow pin. And then I made the water blue water, I actually put the water symbol on there.
Yeah.
And so that helped me like focus on where I wanted to look. So all that's like the background of the story. And we drive out to Indiana. Everybody wants to go sit in the spots that we're familiar with the first morning, just because, it's the first morning. We want to go where we can and not mess around. But I have a different mindset right off the bat. I just want to scout. I'd rather spend that first day scouting, even right from sunrise, rather than sitting in some wide open hardwoods hoping that a buck's going to chase a doe. But either way, I had a good spot to go to. So I was going to go there, and lo and behold, there's a truck there as we pull up to the spot. And granted, it's national forest, and there's a ton of land there that I have a pretty good idea where this guy is hunting based on where he's parked, but he also might not want to drive down that shitty road. So I don't, he could have walked. I was going to just get dropped off where his truck is and walk down the road a little more and then cut into the woods. I just didn't feel good about it. I thought there's no reason for me to possibly go walk under somebody else's hunt this early right off the bat. So I dropped a friend off, and I went down to my first spot that I wanted to check, which is only about like 400 yards from where that hunt happened last year. It's this big 70-acre clear cut, and on the very back side of it, smack dab in the middle. I mean, this stuff is so thick you can't walk through it.
Yeah.
And unless you're on a deer trail, and even then it's tough. But in the middle of this, it doesn't show up on the aerials on Onyx, but if you look at Google Earth, there's like a tractor path or a mowed path straight through the middle of this that goes back. And when it hits the back edge of the clear cut, there's a finger ridge in these wide open hardwoods that the ridge is, hundreds of yards long going away from the clear cut. And on the top of that flat ridge, there's a pond. And I'm like, man, that just smells like the perfect spot, So I get out of the car and I get my stuff on. I put my safety harness on. I got my backpack on. I got my climber over my backpack. Get my bow, strap my release on, shut the trunk, and I hear deer walking towards me in the thick stuff to the left of the car. And I was like, holy crap, what's happening here? And I look up and I see two does walking towards me. And I was like, oh man, this could be interesting. And they just keep walking towards me. I mean, I just shut the trunk. I wasn't even very quiet about it. And after a couple minutes, I'm just leaning up against the hood of the car. And after a couple of minutes, I realized that the lead doe has an orange dog collar on.
Oh, Jesus.
So I'm like, all right. I'm like, okay, so this is a tame deer. That's why she's walking towards me at the car. And I take a step towards her. And when I do, the other deer run off. They were wild deer that just happened to be with this one.
That's
So
hilarious.
now I have all sorts of crazy thoughts in my head. I'm like, I should just leash her and walk her around with me. She clearly is attracting wild deer.
Yeah, come on along for a walk, would you?
Yeah. So either way, I took some video and took some pictures of her. I fed her I picked a piece of grass and was feeding her. And then I'm like, all right, I need to get to hunting. So my plan was to walk this path, which that's where I parked in this path. So it was nice to see that it existed. And so I start walking. I go about 100 yards and I kick a buck off, making a scrape off that trail. I never saw the deer, but you could see he was working this scrape, and I could smell him. And he only went like 50, 60 yards into the thick stuff where I couldn't see him, and he let me walk right by him.
Yeah.
I wish I knew what that deer was, but who knows? So I continue on. I make it all the way back onto that little ridge. The pond looks good. There's plenty of buck sign all through this space, but I really wanted to get back where I saw that pond and investigate that. It looked okay. Finding stand locations was going to be tricky, but I decided I'm just going to sit on the ground looking down into this big gully off of this ridge for a while. And I sat there for maybe 2 hours, maybe not even. I did see a deer. One doe came up all alone up and over the ridge. Went and investigated the trail she came up on. Saw somebody had put a tree stand up there. I was like, well, they got it was the highest tree stand I've ever seen, by the way. They had
Really?
I think they had 8 or 9. No, maybe it wasn't 9. 7 or 8 ladder sticks, climbing sticks.
Yeah.
Up to it. It was good 30, 35 feet up there.
Most of the time when I
But
see
like,
guys
they're in a
on
good
tree
spot,
stands,
but it's
they're
probably
like, what the hell are you doing? Because I'm normally on like side hills and shit where it's like good on one side, but the other side is like,
yeah,
it's a trip.
Well, this dude was on top of a ridge and that high. I can't imagine what it looked like looking down into those valleys on either side. But either way, I texted my buddy that I dropped off. He was in the stand location where I shot that buck the year before, and he said, let's meet at the road at 10 o'clock. And I thought, all right, that gives me like a half hour to walk out of here. And the wind was blowing from the car to me. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm just going to still hunt my way back. I guarantee I'm going to see a deer. Like, it'd be awesome to catch a buck bedded or maybe cruising through one of these trails that are crisscrossing all over the place. So I'd walked about 300 yards back towards the car, and I'm really just taking my time. I have no rush. I'm analyzing everything, and I hear a deer sneeze. I just heard a sneeze, but it had to have been a deer, right? Like, there was nobody else out there. In my mind, like, in a matter of a split second, I thought, was that a sneeze or was that like a squirrel jumping once in the leaves? Like, it was just a, man, that was a sneeze. And I took 2 steps before I convinced myself it was a sneeze. And when I did, I looked to my right, and I'm paralleling the edge of this clear cut, and the edge is about 25 yards. And when I looked to my right, I just saw antlers, like a buck was cruising. I was heading south, and he was heading north on the edge of the clear cut to my right. And he was just cruising, sniffing the ground. And I ducked down, I knocked an arrow, looked up, and saw that his head was still on the ground. So I stood up, and I'm like, how am I going to shoot through all this thick stuff? And I looked like just a little to my right. I didn't even have to move. There was a shooting lane, like there was a deer trail through this from me to the edge, right in front of me. I mean, wide open. There wasn't a twig in the way. And I'm like, I'm going to shoot this deer at 25 yards, broadside. It's going to be perfect. He might even be slightly quartering away, but either way, like, I know I'm aiming right behind the shoulder, and I'm going to smoke this thing. And his head got to the edge of it was so thick that, like, I wasn't really concerned about him seeing me draw before he got there.
Right.
And he got to the edge and he started to rake a tree. I'm like, how perfect could this be? So I come to full draw, and knowing damn well that he could rake that tree for 5 minutes, but I'd worry about that if it happened. And so I draw, and he just raked it for a second, and then he took a couple steps, and I'm expecting him to like step into the shooting lane, and instead of stepping into the shooting lane, he turns and walks up this trail and is walking straight to me, head up, no longer sniffing the ground. I'm standing up in a mowed path 20 yards from him, full draw, with my stand on my back.
That's crazy.
And he's just walking at me. And it got to the point where I was nervous that I'm like, is he going to run into me? Like, is he going to hit? Like, am I just going to let my arrow go while it's touching him? Like, that crossed my mind. I also, what's that?
It'd be worth it.
Yeah, but I mean, how accurate are you going to be at that point? You know, it was happening so quickly. I can tell you that he wasn't walking real fast, and when he was about halfway to me, so at like 12, 15 yards, I had the wherewithal. Like I'm looking through my peep sight and I'm aiming at him, and I'm already comfortable with the idea of taking a head-on shot with him. If he's not walking, I don't want to do it when he's walking. But I realized that his rack is like even with his ears, and I actually like peeked over my peep sight and opened my other eye. I'm cross-eye dominant, so I have to close my left eye, but I actually peeked at him for a second just to make sure that he wasn't like a 1.5-year-old 8-pointer that I wanted to make sure it was something I should be shooting. And especially 2 hours into the first hunt of a week-long hunt, you know?
Right.
But I did a quick peek and I was like, you know what? Even if he is, like, this story is crazy and this is an awesome hunt. I've always wanted to shoot a deer on the ground. I'm on public land. Like,
I was going to ask you, have you ever shot a deer on the ground before with your bow?
Yes and no. The first deer that I ever shot at with my bow, I got shot and lost. And that was when I was like super young. And I had intended to climb up into the crotch of this huge oak tree that had been dead for a long time. And it was like broken off, like 8 feet off the ground. Brought some screw-in steps to climb up there. And when I got to it, I'd only seen it from a distance. And when I got to it, it was hollowed out. So I literally just stood inside the oak tree and I shot this doe at like, I don't know, 15 yards or something, but I gut shot her because I didn't stop her. I just shot her when she was walking. But super young.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking here before we started recording, and that was one of the reasons I almost shot that buck. We were talking about opportunities, and other than the buck that I shot and the doe that I shot with my bow, I didn't have any other opportunities. I wasn't passing deer. But that was one of the reasons why I almost pulled the trigger, because I drew on him to see I just wanted to see if I could do it. Yeah. And then of course, once you do it and your pin settles, your finger starts itching a little bit. And, like you said, preference wise, you got a pile of 2.5-year-olds. And it was funny. I was talking to somebody the other day about mounting the 2 that I shot this year. And I was like, I'd probably mount both of them, but I mounted so many of my 2.5-year-olds, I don't have a ton of wall space left.
Right.
I'm like, I went a little crazy on all my 2.5-year-olds. So, yeah, preference wise, I was like, it would be cool to get my first buck on the ground, but I also told myself that I was trying for 3.5 or better this year with my bow.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
So I was just wondering if you had shot one on the ground before with your
bow.
No,
and I'll be honest with you, it's something that's always intrigued me, but I just didn't think it was realistic. But I've been watching the hunting public guys on YouTube, and those guys are getting it done on the ground, and I watch it for like the entertainment value. I just like to see how they're doing it. But
those guys are so freaking impressive. I mean, just the patience they have and how they play things out, and you know what it is a lot too is just taking the risk. Like, you're hunting spots and you're like, I don't want to blow it up. I don't want to do this. I don't want to spook that. It's like they're in there just trying to get it done, and it's possible. But, us looking at it like, man, we're going to screw this up if we go in like that.
Right. And it takes the right situation to be able to do that. But, I mean, they're opening my eyes more in that, you can go sit in the open hardwoods on a ridgetop and get it done.
Yeah.
It's persistence, it's taking the risk, it's finding the right spot to do it. I'm not going to sit here and try to talk like I know what I'm talking about. I think those guys, I don't think they're the best hunters in the world, but they're figuring it out, and it's fun to watch, and that's why I like watching them. And it's definitely like put the bug in my brain to want to do it.
Yeah, and What's crazy about some of that stuff too is you look at some of the state land we have right around us here.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get lost for a day. I mean, I went, I think it was Tuesday of opening week, a gun. It was either Tuesday or Wednesday. I went, and I mean, I got lost for, till 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yep.
And I saw, I think 7 deer, all doe. I could have shot, just didn't have a good angle. I didn't want to ruin meat. I'm to the point where I'm meat hunting. I'm not just trying to kill deer. So
Sure.
But I mean, it was one of those deals where I've done it so many times around here now with all this state land where you can just go and I did it a ton before turkey, trying to turkey scout.
Mm-hmm.
I would just take off and I'd end up having my wife pick me up somewhere because I went so far away from my truck. I don't want to come back.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That's a good way to do it.
But the stuff that you find is like, holy shit, if you really want to dive into it, it's there.
Yep, for sure. And that's, I haven't done that a whole lot around here. I have done it more so turkey hunting around here.
Yeah.
But to get out to that national forest, I should look up how many acres it is. But I mean, I was a half hour north of the house we rent, and I've been a half hour south of the house we rent, and it's everywhere. Like it's gigantic. It's all fragmented and broken up, but there's huge chunks. And then, it's basically it's fragmented by all these little private houses and maybe a farm here and there. Or maybe there's like a main highway and there's a bunch of, it's all private along the highway, but you get off on a side road and all of a sudden you're back in this national forest. There's so much to explore. And it's just awesome.
The clear cuts you're talking about, is that stuff that's like state managed?
Well, it's federal.
Federal?
It's a national forest. So
they're actually doing cuts on that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And they're all varying ages. And that's the one thing I've utilized Onyx to identify them. But I'd also go to Google Earth where I can slide the time frame so I can get an idea of how old those clear cuts are.
Gotcha.
It helped a little bit, but that's the kind of thing you got to put boots on the ground because you don't know exactly what they did. If they burned it, if they didn't burn it, if they replanted it, maybe they left some like seed trees. There's a bunch of different ways that they could handle it that change that landscape when you get there. I didn't come across too many places that actually look similar. I'd get to one clear cut and it would be all grass and stuff, which obviously that just means that it's younger, but some of them I got to, and there was, a lot more woody vegetation, and I don't know if they didn't burn it or maybe they did. I don't know the logistics, but I used that to kind of to figure out, all right, you look at a clearing on the map, is it going to be a field or is it going to be, 10-foot, woody vegetation?
That's what I struggle with a lot when I'm looking at Onyx scouting places, and then I go and actually put boots on the ground. I'm like, I have a very hard time trying to figure out like what the forest is going to look like before I get there. Because I can look at terrain features and be like, oh, this looks really good, but then I'll get there and start walking it, and I'm like, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be. Or I did that a lot during turkey season this year. I wandered a lot. And I found some shit that I was just like, I had no idea this is what it was like.
Right. And you can see a little bit of that on aerials by looking through the different seasons. You might be able to catch it in the fall or the winter and the spring. And if you really were doing some remote scouting, you could dive in and look at soil types and you could understand like what types of trees grow in that type of soil and figure it out. But
yeah, I'm sure that people are far more knowledgeable in it than I am, but just a little bit of looking that I do on Onyx and shit. That's the one thing I struggle with, and it's another one of those things where it's almost another hobby to jump into it and figure it out and learn it.
For sure, man. It definitely helps extend your season,
Yeah.
And I think part of the fun of it is getting to where you picked, and then getting to see what it actually looks like. It's pretty fun,
So there was one piece that I went and checked out during turkey that I drive by all the time for work. It's down in the southern tier. And it's one of those deals where like I looked at all the maps, tried to figure out like where would be a good spot to start. It was actually that, I think it was the first weekend or second weekend we had snow last year.
Yeah, for last year, 2 years ago, we had it on the first weekend.
I think it was,
Might have been the second weekend this year.
yeah, it might have been. So I took a ride because I wasn't staying at camp, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go check out this property I've always wanted to check out. And I drove up there. I was there before sunrise, and I started walking, and I got on the ridge of this hill, and I didn't realize how cool this spot was, but it's like a huge bowl, and then there's like a ridge on the other side, so there's a slope facing you as well, but you're like you're basically on the top of the ridge, and you're on like the straight of the Y, and then if you follow the Y out, it like cuts off, and then like where I was standing, I was like, if a bird gobbled within like 2 miles or 3 miles, I could freaking hear it.
Yeah.
And it was just like a pin drop morning with snow on the ground. I didn't hear a freaking thing, but I'm like, this is the most gorgeous freaking spot that I've ever seen in my life.
Well, they might have been there the next day, or they might be there next year. It's good.
I tell you what there was. What was freaking deer everywhere.
Okay.
And I look at that spot now every time I drive by thinking about deer hunting it, but I'm all out of tags except for DMP tags, and they're all for around here. So.
Yeah. Well, got to keep that in mind for next year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I totally deterred you from your story, like before you let your arrow fly.
Yeah, I don't remember how we even got off topic. That thing was walking straight at me, and I looked to make sure that it was something I wanted to shoot. That's how we got distracted. I decided I was shooting it no matter what because I was on the ground.
Right.
But I was like really getting nervous that he wasn't going to stop. And I was trying to figure out, do I just swing and let it go as he walks by me at, within a couple of feet, or is he going to walk straight into me? And he stopped, and he got real tall looking at me. And I thought, oh no, like, this is split second. He's going to bolt. But then he turned and looked to his left, and his ears turned to the left. Like, he got real attentive to his left at 5 yards. And I had a second, and I analyzed the angle of his body, and rather than hitting, putting my pin on center, I just moved it slightly off to the right, and I let it go. At 5 yards, I have a nocturnal knock. I saw a flash of color. I can't tell you I saw the lighted knock. I just saw like a flash at his body, and it bowled him over backwards. He didn't like end over backwards, but his back legs gave out. He fell backwards over his legs onto the ground, and he rolled to his side, and he made like a half moon through the thick stuff and went back into those open hardwoods. And I heard 3 or 4 bounds, and then I didn't hear anything. And I just stood there like holding my breath, listening for a crash. Nothing. And it's crispy, like real crispy. And I'm like, man, I stood there for it seemed like forever. It was probably less than 30 seconds, but I never heard a crash. And I'm like, all right, I'm positive I just killed that deer. Like, I just had that feeling. I knew, but I was real nervous that I wasn't going to have a blood trail. I've never wanted to take a head-on shot like that because I've had a couple of friends do it and we lost their deer due to lack of blood.
Yeah, that's the problem with that shot is you got no exit wound, and if you don't hit jugular or something, I mean, you're not going to have just a paint can of a blood trail.
Right. And so I'm real nervous. I'm excited. I flipped my phone open. I'm going to do a little selfie video about what just happened, capture the moment. I'm shaking so bad that I shut my phone off. Well, I shut the video off, and I don't realize it. So I do this whole 2-minute interview and realize I didn't have it recording. So I hit record and redid it. And I just, again, no pressure. Like, it's a beautiful day. All my friends are still in the woods. I'm supposed to be meeting this guy at 10 o'clock. I still got a mile to walk back to the car, and then he's just, maybe a quarter mile down the road. But all right, I sent the text to everybody, just shot one, and there's shitty cell service there, so I'm not expecting anybody to get it. But I'm hoping the guy I'm picking up at least knows I'm coming now.
Right.
I shot him at 9:50 or 9:51. Like it was a couple hours into my hunt. And so I hightailed it back to the car. When by the time I got to him, all the other guys had gotten word and they had climbed down and they had showed back up, or they all showed up. And one of the guys with us had a deer cart. So we walked in there, and where I last heard him is where he was. We had very little blood until we were like 20 yards into the hardwoods. So maybe like 40 yards into the trail. And it's a steep downhill. And he like ran down there and stood in one spot, and there was a bunch of blood on the ground. And then rather than like falling downhill, he actually stumbled back up the hill like 15 yards. And so it was a super easy extraction. We loaded him on that cart there, and the toughest part was getting him through the 25 yards of thick shit out to that mowed trail. And then it was down the mowed trail from that spot, it was like 0.7 of a mile back to the car. And we all took turns, and we loaded that deer cart wrong. It was the first time any of us had used it. And it was like heavy to the point where it was like heavy on the back end. So you had to push down on the part that you're pulling on.
Right.
Putting your hands behind your back and pushing down while pulling a deer. It was not the most comfortable thing, but way more comfortable than dragging it. And we didn't have to like pack it out. I was prepared to quarter and pack out a deer in this on this trip for sure, because we're all hunting kind of far away from the road, and I have no problem quartering an animal. I just thought it would be kind of cool. But either way, we used the cart, we got it out, and I was free and clear for the rest of the week. I became the scouting tool. I got to go check out all those spots that I had looked at on maps, and some of them were dead on, man. We walked in there and there were trees that were like, 10, 12-inch trees that were rubbed up, and tons of buck sign. One guy, we got him up in a stand in there, and he actually had a shooter buck, like monster buck, chasing a doe. And some other hunters parked on the road right behind him, slammed their doors and made some noise, and that deer ended up taking off. They spooked the doe, and the buck, obviously he didn't care. He was just following the doe, but he didn't get a shot at it. And then right at the end of the trip, I had another spot that I thought we could access from like a public fishing access, but that was actually gated off. But before I even tried to do that, I thought, hey, there's like an old county road that borders this. And when I got there, it's like turn off the road onto this driveway, go past a sketchy looking house, and then there's what appears to be a meth lab in a trailer. And I'm like, all right, there's a tree down across the road. So I'm like, well, this isn't going to work. So I actually went and knocked on the house door, and nobody answered. And I was like, all right, let's just cut our losses. Let's get out of here. We drove around.
Did you yell police first?
No, we did not. It was very sketchy. And they'll come into play in a second. But we drove all the way around to the north end of this block, and I pulled in the driveway. Shirtless, tattooed guy answers the door, and I'm like, hey, I just wondering if I could walk down that old county road or whatever it is on the edge of your property there. He's like, yeah. He's like, it's grown in, man. He's like, you're gonna have trouble walking down it, but you can walk down it if you want. You can park here and walk in. I don't mind. He kept saying like, well, you're not gonna be able to get a 4-wheeler down it. And I was like, well, I'm just looking to walk. And he's like, well, it's not good. But honestly, if I had to get a 4-wheeler down it, I would have. It just would have, we might have scuffed it up a little bit. But either way, it was a mile walk into this area where it was like rows of planted conifers, CRP in between them, some ponds, and then open hardwoods, like, around the outside of this area. And that was like a 50-acre area that had all that in it. And I'm like, it's so far away from where anybody can actually access it from public, unless they do what we did. And I just had a feeling that nobody's doing that because there's houses right there.
Yeah.
So I felt good about it. We went in there. We didn't see a ton of sign, but we saw some. And we ended up hanging a stand and put another guy in there the next morning. I walked him in there, and he killed a buck that morning, very similar to mine, almost identical. which turned out they're both 2.5-year-old deer, you know, and I'm okay with that. What an awesome story. And
Well, they're good. They're good freaking 2.5. So
yeah, I mean, the thing had 10-inch G2s. I'm not complaining at all about it.
no.
So anyways, when I heard that he had killed that, I told everybody, I'm like, look, we're going back. We're knocking on that door. And, you know, we're not dragging that thing a mile. I mean, I don't think we have to. We can go 300 yards and be out to the road if these people just let us walk out onto the road. And so I knock on the door, and this girl's like, oh, that's my uncle's property. You got to go back to the trailer behind the house and talk to my uncle. And I'm like, oh, boy, here we go. This trailer on the front door, it says, went to Bob's to charge my phone. Be back in a while. It was written on the door of the trailer in Sharpie marker. I don't know how it'd been there a while. It wasn't fresh. So I'm like, I knock on the door, nobody answers. So I walk around the back end of the trailer, and the guy's out there splitting firewood. So I wave to him, and he waves to me, and he comes walking over. I said, hey, our buddy shot a deer over here in the National Forest. I was just wondering if we could access through this road right here to go get it. It'd be a lot easier. You know, we came from the other end, and it's a good 1.5 miles out of there. And he's like, oh, you got a deer back there? Whereabouts? And I was like, well, you know where the pond is? He's like, yep. Is it right down in the holler below the pond? I said, yeah, it is. He goes, you want me to just unhook my wagon here and get it out with my lawnmower? And I was like, sure, man, that would be awesome. So this dude, he's got like a 1957 John Deere lawnmower that has like mutter tires on it. He had taken the old cast iron motor out, put a newer motor in with a pull start. It's got a smokestack exhaust on it. And so we said, all right, yeah, we're just down below that pond. He was like, all right. And he just took off like down the road. Like he was going to find some 4-wheeler trail or something. And we walked in the way we knew how to go get our friend who's sitting at the stand. He had broken the stand down. And we get there and we start, he hadn't even tracked it yet. So we start tracking it, and we don't have a good blood trail.
Oh, Jesus.
This thing went 160 yards. He's a hell of an archer. I'm confident that he made a good shot. I just, he's confident he made a good shot, but we're just not getting blood right away. 160 yards, I think, was the distance. He heart shot that thing, and it didn't bleed until like the last 30 yards.
Yeah. Pretty
crazy. But either way, that dude on the lawnmower pulled up right where we were. Like he knew where we were going to be. And he dragged that thing out. That we got about 200 yards away, and the thing ran out of gas.
Oh, Jesus.
He's like, any of you guys got gas? We're like, yeah, not on us, man. Like, I don't know what you want me to do. He lifts the hood up, and he shakes the gas can around. I don't hear anything, and it fires back up. And he drove that thing all the way to the road, to a field where I could at least drive the truck into the field and get it out of the field. And it was, man, we gave him some money, and he was happy. He says most money he made in a week, and it was awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm thinking about sending that guy a Christmas card so that we can access that in the future. But
it's funny because you find people like that, and you don't know whether it's going to be a horrible experience or they're going to be the nicest goddamn people you ever meet in your life.
He couldn't have been nicer, man. It was just a good lesson in don't judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely.
We were really expecting a meth lab, and this guy was just, he showed us some bucks that he had shot over the years out of his backyard there.
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, it was cool. So yeah. So then I came home and didn't hunt for a week because I felt fulfilled. I was spending some time with Jess, and Jess works overnights in the hospital, and we don't get a whole lot of time together. So the stress was off, and I was like, cool. Like, she wanted to hunt, and we weren't going to get a chance until the following Friday. And she actually didn't want to get out of bed. She'd been working hard, and she just didn't feel like getting up early that day. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go out on my own. And I went, and I sat in the stand that I was going to put her in, and immediately, I wasn't even going to sit in a stand. I was just going to, again, scout and walk around and sit on the ground for a little bit. I was more of a scouting mission. But when I got there, I decided, let me just get in that stand for the first hour and just see what happens. I had an arm to like hang my backpack and my bow up, and I got up in the stand, and while I was fumbling around for that bow arm, I heard deer moving behind me, and it was a couple of does, and I heard a grunt. I'm like, oh, how am I going to pull this off? So I sat on the stand, put the backpack between my legs, and I was pinching it between my legs. I got an arrow knocked, and I look over, I can see the 2 does. and then I don't see any other deer. And I look over the other direction, over my other shoulder, and I just see the back end of a deer go back into this thick stuff. Like, well, that had to have been whatever that was that grunted. I never saw the front end of it. I don't know what it was. And eventually a fisher came out and was chasing a squirrel around in this blowdown and eventually caught the squirrel. And that and it spooked those does enough that they ran off, but then they filtered back in. And now this fisher's just eating this squirrel, and the deer kind of looking at the fisher, and then they decide to go back into that thick stuff. And I'm not too concerned about the fisher. So I'm like, cool. Now I get everything set up. I get my bag hung up. I get my bow, my quiver off. Everything's ready to go. I'm like, now I'm going to grunt and see if I can get whatever that was to come out of that thick stuff. And I grunted, sat back down. 2 seconds. Well, I didn't sit back down. I actually got my bow in my hand and got ready. And sure enough, out popped this little 4 or 5 pointer spike looking thing. He was maybe 85 yards from me. And he kind of marched up to my level on this hillside, went past me and circled around me. And he got out in front of me like 100 yards. And I was like, cool. Like, I don't have a whole lot of luck grunting and rattling, calling deer in general. Just never, even using like scent wakes, none of that stuff ever really seemed to work for me. So I'm like, well, that's cool. I definitely grunted that thing out of there. So that was cool. Well, he gets like 100 yards from me and I see his tail go up and it's wagging like a dog. And I know what's happening. I'm like, I didn't realize it, but there must have been a doe up there. And sure enough, he starts running this doe around in circles in front of me. I'm like, wow, this is great. Like, hot doe in the area. Hopefully she's hot and she's not just trying to get away from him, but she's acting like a doe that's kind of, she's not just booking it. Like, she'll run and stop, run and stop, run and stop. And he eventually ran her over this hill out of my sight. And I was kind of watching where they went. And I was like, man, that's really cool. So I sat back down, hung my bow up. I looked back up where they ran from, and I just see antlers. What's behind you? But I just see tall, many antler. Yes, I just see that, right? And I'm like, holy shit, how am I going to get this thing? Because he's over 75 yards away from me, maybe 100. I'm not sure. Immediately, I grab my bow and I grunt once, and he looks in my direction, and then he starts walking towards where those deer went. So I grunt again, and he stops, and this time he kind of turns his body a little bit, and I'm like, please do it, please do it, please do it. And he turns and starts trotting in the direction that those deer went. So I'm like, damn, now or never. And he spun around on a dime and just marched right back to me. And he didn't come straight to me. He came like crossing from right to left, 75 yards in front of me. And I'm looking at, like, I wasn't even nervous because I was like, this is cool. That's a giant buck, but I'm not going to get a shot at him. So I'm not too nervous. And then he gets even with the stand and he turns and just walks straight at me. Then my legs started shaking. And I was like, all right, man, pull it together. Like, he's getting close. And there was a logging road 30 yards in front of me. And he hit that logging road and turned to go back where he came from, broadside. And I just did the quick little meh and shot him for 30 yards. And I saw my arrow. I saw the little flick of the nocturnal. I could see it sticking in the ground, but I saw it flash. And it hurt. It sounded good. But in my mind, I'm panicking, like, oh, I just missed him. And in that split second, like, I saw him, like, rear up and like, turn away from me. And when I did, I could see the blood coming out of right behind his shoulder. And he ran, like, 20 yards and stopped. And now I'm like, oh, go down, go down, go down. And then he started running again. I'm like, no. But he wasn't really running. He was just doing that stumble, and he died 45 yards from me. Or from where I shot him, at least. And I could see him laying on the ground. And I called Jess, and she's like, oh, you shot one, didn't you? I'm like, yep, I just shot the biggest buck of my life. She's like, will you wait for me to go get it? I'm like, it's dead right here in front of me. Like, I can see it. And she's like, will you wait for me to go get it? And I was like, yep, I will. So I did. I literally got to that logging road. I didn't even find my arrow. I expected my arrow to be on the other side of it. I couldn't find it. I looked back, and it was actually on the near side of the logging road. So he was a little closer than I thought. But either way, I left my arrow in the ground, and I walked out to the road and waited for Jess to get there. And we went back in, found him, got pictures. He was I guess he's got 11 scorable points. He's a mainframe 10. He had a split brow on one side and he had a broken tine on one side. But I scored him pretty. I feel like, I mean, not Pope and Young official scorer accurate, but I scored him with a guitar string that doesn't stretch, and I made sure I measured from the plane of the beam. You know, I didn't give him anything extra, that's for sure. And he, I think he gross scored 136 and 6/8 or 135 and 6/8.
Nice.
Net score was like 127 because I had to, you know, he had an abnormal point, so I had to take that off. But
see, that's where I ran into trouble scoring my first. I'm gonna call him an 8 point because he was mainframe 8, but he had all sorts of shit going on. There was over 1 inch stickers and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know how to count this or what's a deduct or.
Yeah.
So I pretty much scored him as is.
Add it all up. That's the way I like it.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like, he's between 120 and 130, but just a crazy gnarly deer. But yeah, that's freaking awesome. So 30 yards and you let her fly.
Yeah, and honestly, I told myself 30 yards was the max. That should be my max all the time. There's been points in my life where I've been really proficient at shooting, working at the archery shop, shooting all the time, shooting 3D Winter League. Like prior to elk hunting, if I practice all summer long, I practice at 60 yards plus. Like I've been very comfortable at shooting 60 yards in the past. Not that I ever would at a whitetail,
right,
or an elk for that matter. I think like 40 yards is probably my max range at shooting at anything. But whitetails they're weary, man, and they're always keyed in. I feel like shooting over 30 yards, like they have to be preoccupied, feeding something where you're pretty confident. And I'm aiming low. I'm aiming for a heart shot, hoping that when they duck, I hit them in the lungs.
Yeah.
But I haven't done that. I honestly haven't taken that shot very often. I've shot 30 yards a few times, but when that thing turned and I knew he was at 30, I didn't range it, but I felt pretty comfortable that was a 30-yard shot. I was glad because I don't want to shoot over 30, and I'd rather him be at 15 or 20. I'll be honest with you, 5's cool, but I don't know if I want to wish that. Like that's close quarters, and like that deer on October 3rd was at 5 yards out of a tree stand. That's a steep shot out of a tree stand.
You gotta aim like at the bottom of their brisket.
Yeah, it's there's more to it than just putting the pin on them when they're that close. That somebody asked me, they're like, what pin? Because in our 3D league, Winter League, a lot of times we'd put a target like 2-3 yards from the line, and you'd have to use your 50 or 60 yard pin to hit the bullseye on that thing. So one of the guys that was in Indiana with me used to work at the shop also and shoot those leagues. He's like, what pin did you use? And I was like, all of them. All of my pins at 5 yards, all of my pins were in that sweet little spot. And it wasn't like that, going back to that shot, that wasn't like a poke and a hope. I've shot a lot of close-up targets in 3D League to know where I need to shoot at that range, but also back to like not wanting to take frontal shots. I got to attribute watching YouTube videos again to that. And the hunting public guys have done it a few times, but they started doing it for the same reasons that I like. They watch the Born and Raised Outdoors guys, and I don't know if you've heard of them. They're elk hunting guys, primarily. But those guys hunt out in the freaking rainforest in Oregon and Washington, and when they get shots at elk in that thick cover out there, they're head-on shots at 5 and 10 yards, and they do them frequently. And they've actually put out some videos, and they've extensively talked about how to shoot them. And if you butcher your own deer, you have a little bit more of an intimate knowledge of their anatomy, and you understand where that spot is on their chest, where the arteries and the trachea and the esophagus all go through that armor. There's a hole there. And on a whitetail, it's small. Luckily at 5 yards, it's big enough. But you're not. I don't think it's a good idea to take a 20-yard shot head on or a 30-yard shot head on. If it is, you better be very, very good at shooting and know exactly where you're aiming. Take into consideration the angle of their head and really understand where you're pulling the trigger. Can I tell you that I calculated all that at 5 yards in my head? No, but I knew enough that like I was in the right spot. You know what I mean? When it gets further out, that's where you really have to pay attention to it. And I felt good about it. You know, I kind of pride myself on not taking unethical shots, and there wasn't a shade of doubt when I hit the trigger on that deer.
So,
in Indiana.
I mean, you gotta know as well. You gotta know, your personal limits. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I've gotten, like you were saying, you know, you shot all those leagues. I used to shoot, you know, weekly, more than once a week. You know, when I was younger. And I don't know what changed, if it turned into a head game or if it turned into what, but probably the last 10 years, you know, I've been hunting for over 15, probably I'd say 20. I've been shooting a bow, and it's just been, the last 10 have been like, I've screwed up a couple archery shots and it gets in your head.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I've never gotten away from it. And now that I'm older and I realize it, I'm like, I'm just gonna wait for anything inside of 20. Like I know that I have a tendency to screw this shit up, so it's gonna be up close and personal. So
absolutely,
this year worked out perfect for that for me, because, like you said, the 5-yard shots are not fun, but like you've said, I've experienced enough to know that people that take those shots, you know, they normally send them over them or send them in the guts or send them too far forward and they don't hit any vitals. I aimed with my 0 to 20 pin, probably like where his front leg met his brisket.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I aimed super fucking low, and if I didn't, I would have shot right over him. But the way that I aimed, I whacked him just inside the edge of the spine, piled him, but it drove down and caught all the vitals, you know, the lungs and everything. So, I mean, part of it probably luck with that shot, but the other part of it was I knew you can't aim dead on there, you're going to have a problem.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And then the doe, patience is, you know, you gotta wait, because I've done it so many times where I just get super excited, punch trigger. And this doe was actually, other people, I don't know if I told this story on the podcast. We were hunting a farm that I grew up hunting with my dad's buddy, and he was in a ladder stand like 50 yards behind me. And we were sitting there, and it was a north wind. I thought we'd be fine, because the deer normally come from the west into the field, and that's to the north of me. So a north wind should blow all the wind into the woods. I should be fine. Well, the deer must decide to lay out back and come north on a north wind to make sure the field's good. So there was like 8 deer that went along the west edge from the south to the north, and they knew we were there. And I was actually watching a nice buck back in the woods, and I texted my dad's buddy because I'd filmed my buck tag. I'm like, really nice buck back in the middle of the woods. So he grunted. So I'm trying to keep binoculars on him, and I couldn't see him. I just happened to turn around and check the field, and there was 3 does standing there at like 35. And I'm like, son of a bitch. And these does are looking for us. I mean, these does know we're there. They know where we sit, and they always come across the field and just catch you in the ladder stand, and you're done. But I'm not in a ladder stand. I put a portable like 30-some feet in a maple tree with a ton of limbs, and they had no idea I was there.
Nice.
So they were trying to bust him, thinking it was the guy in the ladder stand, and I was just in a perfect position for it. So they got in too fast on me, couldn't get drawn. Then she passed me and then went to turn around, and I drew, but then she was facing me. And I was like, if I don't get a good shot, I don't get a good shot. And she took a couple more steps back to go bust him again. And it put her perfect broadside in my 18-yard lane. So I freaking smoked her. She dropped before she left the field. You know, it was just one of those deals where this year I was so adamant in my head that I'm not taking shots, that it ain't going to make it happen, not forcing anything. And to get the confidence back with your bow is just, you got to have it, because if you don't have it, you're going to be messing up over and over again.
For sure. Yeah,
that was going to be one of my questions at the beginning of this is, you know, you struggled with a couple of shots on the first of the season, you know, did that mess with your head at all? And it
Absolutely.
appears
Absolutely.
to have not have too bad because you recovered pretty well.
Well, it did, and I came back and shot my bow at the target a bunch, made sure that there wasn't anything wrong with my bow, and when I went to Indiana, I was actually hoping my buddy brought his target so that I could shoot when I got there, and he didn't bring a target. A guy, his dad was showing up a few days later, and he was bringing one, but I was a little apprehensive. I didn't, there was going to be possibilities for, where I'd have to range a deer and make a decision if I'm going to shoot. I wasn't going to shoot anything over 30 yards, period, because I just haven't practiced over that. And normally, if I'm going to shoot 30 yards, I'm going to practice at 50 yards to make that 30 yard a pop shot. But I'd only been shooting at 20 and 30 yards. I maybe shot one round at 40 this year. And so I wasn't even like totally comfortable at 30. I knew I could make that shot. Like, I'm talking about like if I'm not comfortable, or when I'm saying I'm not comfortable, when I shot at 30 yards, like all my arrows are still within, a 4-inch circle, but still like at 30 yards, my arrows should be damn near touching each other. I feel like I'm capable of doing that. I know I am. I'm just not practicing enough. And so 30 yards was good, but I wasn't feeling great about my shooting, especially after the October 3rd incident. Shooting that deer at 5 yards made me feel good that I killed the deer. It gave me confidence back, but I wasn't going to go shoot at a deer at 30 yards with 100% confidence.
Right.
And that would have been a game time decision. If the deer was standing perfectly still, if I was comfortable, I wasn't shaking, if everything was under control at 30 yards, I would have pulled the trigger. And that's how it happened with that deer in New York. I was shaking pretty bad when he was walking towards me, but this is a product of me spending enough time in a tree stand that I never thought it was possible to control your nerves, but sometime in my 20s, pretty much in my 20s, I shot a lot of deer. And I got to the point where like I could shoot a deer. I wouldn't get overly excited. I shot a lot of does, a couple of small bucks here and there, but I just shot a lot of does. And it just gave me the ability to like maintain composure until the shot happens. After the shot, all bets are off, man. I'm lucky I don't fall out of a tree stand. Like, I think we're all that way, but there was a long, up until I was 22, 23, maybe even later than that, like my legs would shake so bad when a doe was walking in that like I would spook them. They would hear and see me. Like I couldn't hold my pin steady on a deer because I was shaking so bad. And I'm happy that I'm kind of past that, but I'm not totally past it. Like it happened. It happened with that buck. I was shaking when he was walking at me. Like once I realized that this was going to be a thing, he was going to be within bow range or damn close, I got really nervous. But man, I wish I could tell you that I like consciously did it, but I didn't. Like when he turned broadside and I drew my bow, like there wasn't any shaking going on. It was all business. And if I didn't feel comfortable pulling the trigger, I wouldn't have done it. I'm confident. I hate when I hear people. I hear people say like, well, if that was a big buck, I would have taken that shot. And every time I hear that, I'm like, what are you saying, man? Like, so you're willing to wound an older, more mature creature just because it's bigger, like just because it's something you want to put on your wall, like that means it's okay to maybe make a marginal shot on it. That doesn't sit well with me. No, and I've never let that dictate whether or not I shoot. It's whether or not I can kill an animal, like, and quite honestly, like if I decide pretty quickly whether or not I'm going to shoot something. After that, there's no more looking at antlers. Like it's just focus on that pocket and the shoulder and make sure that with archery anyways, or well, really anything, like when it comes time for the shot, look at the opposite side front leg, follow that up, aim there. Like there's a lot of guys that aim behind the front shoulder on the near side, but on a quarter-inch shot, you're screwing yourself.
Yeah.
Depending on which way they're quartered. Always look at the opposite side leg, aim behind that, tight behind that, and you're always going to be all right. And that's what I did, man. I focused and pulled it off. And after that shot, confidence was through the roof. Unfortunately, it was like after that, I'm not even taking my bow out in the woods anymore. I just want to go and try to get Jess a deer, try to get my dad a deer, whatever I can do to help those guys get deer. And it didn't work out. Jess actually did get a shot at a buck. We went out one night. I grunted this little buck in again. He was going to walk away from us, and I grunted, and he turned and came in, and just got too dark. Just by the time he got within range, it was too dark. Went back there the next morning, totally different buck, right at first light, walked out. It was like 22-yard shot, and I think she dropped her arm to like see what happened, and she just shot right under him. And we had a couple other close calls that morning, just didn't come together. She just wants to shoot a deer with her bow. She doesn't even care about shooting one with a gun. And
You guys,
we just couldn't pull it off.
You guys hunting more like ag land, or is it more like forest, or
what? It's both. My dad and I manage a piece of property that is about just under 1,500 acres total, but it's a lot of fields. There's maybe 500 acres of woods, and that's broken up into 5 different woodlots. One of them's pretty big, one of them's a few hundred acres, and then there's some smaller ones.
Yeah.
But it's all ag fields. The one place that I consider the big woods, it's a few hundred acres of woods. There's a pipeline that runs through it. It's some of the prettiest woods I've ever hunted. It's been really, really well managed, forestry wise. They just logged it a few years ago. So when they logged it, they actually did a few small, like 1 or 2 acre clear cuts and then replanted them. It's pretty nice. And there's plenty of deer there. Unfortunately, during gun season, there's about 45 people that get permits to deer hunt it, and it's a little bit of a shit show. And I've been giving people the benefit of the doubt. They've been hunting there their whole lives, and we were tasked with trying to make it a better place for everybody and a safe place. And I thought we were doing a pretty good job. But opening day this year was your stereotypical opening day of hearing 5 rounds at a clip and people walking under your tree stand and not paying attention. One person had he had deer coming in, getting ready to shoot the deer coming in, and here comes this guy, gun shouldered, 40 yards from the tree stand. He's focused on the deer, so he doesn't realize this guy's sneaking up behind him on a logging road. And the dude spooks the deer and just rifles off 5 rounds at him. Like, I wish I could be in there in that moment with everybody, so I could be like, "What's your name?" And not allow them back. And we've whittled it down. Things are going to change for sure. It's just, it doesn't need to be that way. My biggest thing is people just taking unethical shots at deer. There's so many BS. There's no way you're making an ethical shot when you're just racking off 5 rounds as fast as you can.
Yeah.
And whatever. That's a whole another conversation. But either way, yes, where we're hunting, it's pretty much, it's what you would consider ag land. It was pretty much just corn. There was a little bit of soybeans that they took down real early. The guy, he tills everything under, so like they chop the corn, or they didn't even chop it. I think they picked all the corn on this property, but as soon as they're done, they plow it under. So it's not a big draw for deer. There's maybe 2 fields that he didn't plow under, so hopefully it'll be a good draw here the last little bit of the season.
That's what I was running into is, the one farm that we hunt there is, man, when they were cutting the corn, they were coming right behind it and plowing it right down, beans and everything. So there ain't nothing left for them to feed on.
No. Yeah, it makes it tough. That's
so was that the 2 bucks, or was there a third one that I saw on Instagram?
There's a third one. Much quicker story. Because of all that hunting pressure, There's a little thicket that I've hunted around the edges of for a number of years now, but I've never wanted to go in there because there's ag on either side of it, and it's kind of secluded. Like it's not really attached to a woodlot. It's just kind of out there on its own, and I felt like it's always been like a little island of safety for deer, right? And they use it. I put a trail camera in there and didn't touch it. I checked it once at the end of October maybe, and there wasn't anything great on it. I pulled it the day that I shot my archery deer, or maybe the next day, and there were 3 bucks on there that opened my eyes. There was a young, probably 2.5-year-old deer, but he's like well outside his ears. He just has short tines and they're kind of thin. And then there was a buck that was about even with its ears, but he had a cool little crab claw, and he appeared to be like an 8 or a 9 pointer. Couldn't really tell. It was just a head on. But it looked like he had decent beams and kind of, decent mass. Looked like a good deer, but he was the smallest of the 3. And then the third one was this stud 8-pointer that's like well outside his ears, awesome, 10-inch plus tine length, like thick as hell, like big buck.
Yeah.
That's the one I was like, I want to kill that deer. And that gave me like, when I saw that and the pressure's off because I've got 2 deer already, like now's the time. I'm going to go in, and there's only 1 tree in the middle of this thicket that I can hang a stand in. I scouted it out when I hung the camera, and I just didn't want to screw it up. So then I thought, all right, well, I'm going to put a stand in there. I'm going to hunt an open day gun season. And when all this pressure happens around it, I'm going to be in there, and something's coming through there. Don't get me wrong. I was shooting does if they walked by. Like,
right.
I figured you were going to pile into this place. And so I got in there opening day. I met my dad at 5 a.m. And keep in mind, what's legal shooting 7:15 on opening day.
Yeah.
I met my dad at 5 a.m., walked him just over a mile into a stand that I had put up for him in the middle of this one woodlot that he hadn't been to yet. And so I want to make sure he got in there good. Got him all set up, ran out. I managed to get in my stand well before legal. And there's a guy sitting on the edge of this thicket, maybe 150 yards from me, but we're really, like, my wind's not screwing him up, his wind's not screwing me up. Had my wind possibly screwed him up, I wouldn't have gone in there because I knew he was probably going to be in that stand. I'm friends with him. I know who he is. I actually was going to, I have a little trail I was going to sneak in the thicket. And I got in there in the dark, and I could not find my trail. I felt like such a rookie. I was sweating my ass off. I lost my orange hat. I was freaking out. I eventually got back out of the thicket. I called him, or I texted him. I was like, "Are you in your ladder stand over here?" And he was like, "Yeah." I'm like, I'm what's crashing around over here if you can't tell. But do you care if I just walk under your stand? Because I walk under his stand, I can walk up the other edge of this thicket, and there's a straight deer trail that goes right to my stand. And the only problem is I don't like to go into that field that he's looking over because there could be deer in it. I don't want to go in there in the dark in the morning.
That's what's tough with ag in the morning is deer out in the field feeding. If you're trying to access through a field, you're kicking them all out.
Well, so his stand and where I was going into the thicket, we both access it across a bean field that had been plowed under, and there's essentially no reason for deer to be out there. So, and the wind is blowing. We're walking west to our spots from the truck. So and it was a pretty strong west wind, or it wasn't that strong, but there was a good west wind, enough that that was the play. But now I texted him, I said, "Do you mind if I just walk under your stand? I'm trying to get to my spot in this thicket." And he was like, "Sure, no problem." But I know he's going, "What an idiot. Like, he's such a dick." So here I am, half hour, whatever, maybe even a little more before legal shooting. And I'm under his stand. I just look up. I'm like, "I'm so sorry, man." He's like, "Hey, no problem, man. If you need anything, shoot me a text." I was like, "All right." I felt horrible. I literally, I crawled up into my stand. I don't even have any orange on anymore because I just had my orange hat and I lost that in the thicket. I had it over another hat, and that's why I didn't realize I lost it. It's my favorite orange hat. I'm sure I can find it.
You should have had yourself a Pernir orange hat. That's what you should have had.
Well, I would have lost it. It'd be sitting in a thicket right now if I had, because it was my favorite orange hat. And
that's all right. Somebody else would find it. That's good advertisement.
Maybe next time. But either way, I got in that stand and surprisingly dead. Like I heard a grunt in that thicket, but it was over where I was kicking around, and I just find it hard to believe there was actually a deer over there. Maybe it was in a field and came, who knows. Didn't see that deer. At like 8:30, the guy that I walked under shot at a doe that had come out of the thicket I was in, but I never saw it. It's super thick in there, man. I don't even know if I have a shot opportunity at all. It was a little open to the north of me, and I was kind of hoping that that's where I'd see a deer. Well, after he shot and he went and looked for his deer and he didn't see it, so he walked back. Like 10 minutes later, I did catch the ass end of a deer going through there, and I thought, oh man, if that's what deer look like, I may have been missing them all morning. Like I barely saw that deer, and it got out of the thicket and busted across the green field, and I realized it was a doe. So I was like, all right, well, one deer, you know, I'm locked and loaded to sit all day long. So I'm just hanging out there, and at like noon on the property to the west of me, you know, hundreds and hundreds of yards away, I've heard some shooting over there already, and I've gotten excited. Nothing happened. There was a bunch of turkeys in there, and they all started getting real spooky, and then all of a sudden this like group of 15 gobblers filed past me through this ridiculously thick stuff.
Yeah.
And the guy that kicked them out was walking down the opposite edge of the thicket. The north edge of this thicket is the property line, and he was in the field, so he was all right. But he didn't. I mean, obviously he was trying to find deer or push deer, but he had spooked those turkeys, and they were literally paralleling each other. Turkeys couldn't see him. He couldn't see the turkeys. They're just walking. That all goes by, and then at noon I hear some more shooting over there. So I just stand up, and I heard some footsteps coming. And it's so thick, eventually I just see antlers. I saw what I thought was really tall tines. Like, I'm talking really tall tines. And I had to make a split-second decision. Like, he continued to walk, and he had his nose to the ground like he was cruising for does. He didn't appear to be spooked. But in, like, 5 yards, I'm going to have an opening, and I have to shoot there or I'm not getting a shot. So I made the decision. I'm shooting this deer. Like, I think he's bigger than the one I shot with my bow.
Yeah.
So he stepped in there. I pulled the trigger. I didn't even bother stopping him. I'm shooting my rifle at 40 yards. Like, it's happening fast. And I dropped him in his tracks. And I was stupidly, I texted all my buddies. I called Jess. I'm like, BBD, I just shot the biggest buck of my life. It's even bigger than the bow deer. I'm barely standing, like I can't even hang on to my tree stand.
Didn't go 20.
Didn't go 20. And so everybody's like, well, send a picture. I'm like, I can't even climb down right now. Give me a minute. And
just
gain my composure. Yeah, stand pot.
Stand pot.
Just give me a minute, folks.
Just give me a minute.
So I climb down and I get over there and I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have sent the BBD text so quickly. It definitely was not the buck that I thought it was. Not that I thought it was any particular deer, but I immediately recognized the crab claw. I'm like, cool, you know, it's the one off the trail camera, but his beams are not long at all. They come out and curl right back around, and you know, he's just a good 2.5-year-old deer. I'm not mad about it at all, man. I'm super pumped with the season I had. You know, I just, the other 2 deer that I have on camera would have been, you know, that would have really been a freaking slammer year had it been one of those. But I'm super happy. I'm beyond happy that I put 3 deer in the freezer, whether they were bucks or does. Like, I'm just pumped that I got some venison in the freezer, and you know, that was the biggest thing. And you know, I'm not mad about shooting that buck on opening day gun season at all. It's taken all the pressure off. Now I can focus on Jess and my dad and scouting around, learning new spots. I went out what day did it snow? Wednesday. I went out, and sure enough, I knew that if I just went slow and worked into the wind, that I'd see some deer bedded, or I'd catch them walking around. And I just still hunted up. I screwed up the first one right off the bat, like 100 yards into walking into the woods. Looked down in this valley, and there's a deer just laying there. And I was like, I could have shot it. but it had a branch over its head, and I thought it was a buck. So I put my binoculars up to look at it, and sure enough, it was a doe. By the time I got the gun up, it was running away. But I got about 3/4 of a mile into the trail and peeked down into a little ravine that was, protected from the wind, and there was a deer standing there. Got down on my butt, had to slide a little bit, put the crosshairs on right behind the shoulders, pulled the trigger, and it ran to the left. And I'm on this steep bank, so I jumped up and I ran over to look over and see where it was going. And the thing's standing at 40 yards from me, coming up the hill, looking at me. So I'm like, I put the scope up, and I'm like, I think that's a fawn. Like, well, it's a doe fawn if it is. Like, this is how much time I have to think. This thing's just staring at me. And I'm like, well, all right, so if it's the deer I just shot, which I thought it was alone, but if it's the deer I just shot, I better shoot it again in case I wounded it. And if it's not, I got 2 doe tags, and this is definitely not a button buck. So, all right, I'm going to shoot it. So I shot it head on with my rifle. And I get down there, and I'm like, it's not a doe. It's not a fawn. It's a 1.5-year old doe. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to leave that, and I'm going to keep looking. So I hunted around. I cut a track. I followed it for a long ways, and then I eventually gave up on the track and went back to that deer, and I did not miss it the first time. I heart shot that thing as perfect as could be.
Oh, shit.
But, dude, so when I walked down to it, I backtracked it all the way to its bed. I saw it probably 10 yards from its bed. There was no blood in the snow, no hair, no nothing. And I shot this thing like right in the armpit, right through the heart, dead as could be. I didn't need to shoot it the second time, but I did.
That's awesome.
So now I got 4 deer in the freezer, and I'm hoping that we can get a couple more for my dad and Jess here before it's all said and done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say you're checking for horns and stuff, because I ran out of buck tags, so I'm doe strictly now. And I ran out Sunday and did a quick hunt with the guys, and I was sitting, and the guys come down out of the drive, and we all meet up on the trail. And I'm like, can't believe nothing came out of there. And everybody's like, yeah, I can't believe nothing came out of there. And the last guy comes out of the middle, and he's like, Steve, the guy on the west edge, you didn't see anything? No, I didn't see anything. Well, there was 40 deer that kicked out of the middle of that woods and went straight back towards the west. He was like, well, I must have been too far ahead of you because I didn't see a thing. So when we got done driving, I was like, I got to go check those gullies in the back, because if 40 deer kicked back to the south, I'm like, there's got to be something hanging in those gullies. And it was just logged this year. I think anybody that watches our stuff, they probably saw I was posting pictures of my my cell camera was taken. There was a guy doing the logging, and they cut down my tree that my camera was on. And
with the camera on it?
Yeah, and then I think they knocked it over, driving by it with a skidder. But then they stood it back up. Somehow they put it back up. They're like, oh, shit, we knocked this down on this guy. So they put it back up. But then somehow they like knocked it over again, or they ran it over with a machine.
Oh.
And then next thing you know, I see it taking pictures on the machine going down the hill to the staging area. And then I texted my buddy. I'm like, this freaking camera's taking a ride on a log skidder. Like, then it's it's like on the guy's bumper of his truck. This is a 2-piece. This is the cell link and the camera.
Yeah.
This is 2-piece, never shut off. And now I'm getting pictures of him like dragging logs down, turning around, going back up. I'm like, dude, this thing's like sitting on the bumper of the guy's truck.
No kidding.
I'm like, can you go grab that thing? So he was like, yeah, I'll go grab it. So then I started getting pictures of him and his wife in the office. I'm like, perfect. I know it's safe now. But
yeah.
So that area, I knew it was logged, and I knew all those deer kicked back. And I'm like, there's got to be something laying in there. So I went back after we were done driving, and I had my lead sled. So I built a shooting bench for my buddy's farm because we were doing a bunch of long-range shooting. And I was like, it'd be fun to build a shooting bench for down there. So I built one, put it down there. And then I was like, when we get into gun season, I'm going to put this thing up on top of the hill, looking down over the fields with the shooting bench inside a ground blind, and I'll put the lead sled right in there. Well, I gave the lead sled to the guys to take to camp to sight their guns in for opening day, and I forgot it there because I wasn't going in the cabin because of COVID and shit.
Right. Yep.
So I never went in the cabin, and I didn't know they had put it in the cabin. And when I left for the weekend, I never saw it there. Then I got home and I was like moving the ground blind and putting the shooting bench in it, and I'm like, I don't have my lead sled. So when I went down to camp the next time, I got the lead sled. We did the drive. I was like, I want to run up in my truck and put the lead sled on the bench quick, and then I'll get out of there. And I was like, well, I think this was like 10 o'clock in the morning. We were done driving, and we had a cut deer at 1. And I was like, well, I got a little bit of time. I was like, I'll go take a walk in these gullies and see if there's any deer. And I'm sneaking up to the edge, and my wind's blowing out of the south. And the gully that I'm going to look at is to the north of me. So I'm walking up there, and I came in low across the field to the bottom of the gully, figuring that if anything was further up the gully, I could just sneak up the edge and find it before it finds me. And I was like 10 yards from the edge of the woods, and I heard that pop, like a branch snap. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I just jumped something. So I like ran up to the edge and just took a knee and pulled my gun up. And I see this deer coming up through the tops. And just judging by the body, I was like, that's a freaking nice buck. And I'm like, the thing's coming through the tops. I put the red dot right where it's coming out. It comes out, red dot's on the chest, and I'm still looking for antlers. And it's probably 85, 90 yards. And I'm like, I don't want to shoot this even if it's a 4-pointer, a big body 4-pointer. I don't want to shoot this if it's got horns on it.
Yeah, of
so
course.
I'm trying to verify that it doesn't have horns on it. And I'm just like in awe over the size of the body of this deer. And by the time that I realized it didn't have horns on it, I never had a shot. And I'm like, son of a bitch, that thing was so freaking big. And, me and Billy always got this deer taily thing going, and he's won the last 2 years, and I'm like hell bent to beat him. And I'm 5'4" right now, and I'm like, if I could put one more nail in the coffin just to keep it rolling.
Yep.
And I'm like, God, it was standing right in front of me, and I let it run by because I thought it had horns on it.
Well, that's the name of the game if you're gonna do it that way. If
Yeah.
you don't have a buck tag, it's just the way it goes.
That's
Did he shoot a giant one? A giant doe? One of you guys were talking about shooting a big one on your podcast this last time.
Yeah, I mean, it's unverified, so could have been a yipper.
Gotcha.
No, it was a good doe, but he didn't have a scale to put it on, so